Our Social Security and Medicare up for grabs. Republican Representative Mark Alford of Missouri says he supports Elon and Vivek cutting Medicare and Social Security when the Department of Government Efficiency looks for ways to cut $2 trillion, trillion with a T, out of the federal government's budget. Let's watch.
It's going to mean cuts. It's going to mean cuts to the 24% of the discretionary spending that we have. And it's also going to mean looking long-term at the front end of some programs like Social Security and Medicare, not taking anyone off of what they paid into so far. But there is some waste, abuse, and fraud in Medicare that we can take those numbers back and add to our general coffers and our Treasury. And on the front end on Social Security, I think there's a way when people are living longer, they're retiring later, that on the front end we can move that retirement age back a little bit.
The idea that he's floating isn't sitting well with some social media users. The Twitter account Protect Kamala Harris posted, quote, "This is Rep. Mark Alford. He just announced the House GOP plans to cut Social Security and Medicare in 2025. Alford represents 180,000 Social Security recipients and 68,000 seniors on Medicare. Retweet to let Congressman Mark Alford's constituents know he plans to cut their benefits." And Liberal account Art Candy wrote, quote, "It's almost like Democrats warned that MAGA folks like Congressman Mark Alford were coming after Social Security. Shake my head."
As House GOP members continue to suggest raising the retirement age from 67 to 69 for new retirees, President-elect Donald Trump has gone back and forth on whether he will, quote, protect Social Security and Medicare. I mean, I know it's not popular to do it, and Donald Trump has stopped his party from, to best his ability, saying anything about cuts to Social Security and Medicare, because it's not popular. And you can't do things that aren't popular. I don't think he has a mandate to, make cuts there, but I would say, as someone who has long been concerned about how expensive the entitlement system has become for Americans, particularly for younger Americans who are shouldering so much of the costs of our increasingly elderly society, this massive transfer of wealth from a younger generation that is struggling to buy homes for the first time, struggling with, has less financial means. Younger people are poorer than older Americans. Dealing with this in some way, not with massive cuts to the system, but in or at least for Social Security, fixing it in some way so that the people paying it, maybe they're going to stop paying into it, because if you've paid into it, you should get what you paid into. But I don't know how much longer that's going to work.
Look, I think there are two separate arguments here. One is about the fiscal health of the United States, and the other is about the size of government and the way the size of government is discussed. In my opinion, that is often discussed from the right in a very, very sloganeering way, and then they get into this corner where government is terrible unless government spending benefits me, right? And then there are enormous numbers of people who would be affected negatively by cuts to Social Security or Medicare, and that is what renders it unpopular. Elon Musk has talked about cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget. And whenever people propose massive cuts, there's always this magic wand phrase of fraud and abuse, fraud, waste, and abuse. You can't actually cut roughly a third of the federal budget without cutting the actual programs themselves. Now, if that's Pentagon spending, I would say that a lot of people on the left would be completely fine with that. If it is social, what we could broadly term social safety net spending, then I think a lot of people on the left and beyond the left wouldn't be fine with that at all.
Yeah, the question is, can we make cuts without losing key coverage or key services? Because we spend more on our healthcare system than any other developed nation. It's not that we've starved the system. We spend tons of money on it. Somehow that doesn't translate to better care. Although there are debates. Some people will say, some conservatives will make the argument that we do have better, certain levels of care. People from Canada do come here for quicker, to be seen by more specialist doctors that takes a longer time to see in Canada, for instance. So depending on what you're talking about, the care here isn't necessarily worse, but God almighty, is it expensive? And does that have to do with, as we talked about earlier, the disguising of prices, the doctors, medical service people being able to charge whatever they want because it's being covered by someone else. I mean, this happens in the tuition system a little bit, where which I'm more familiar with. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert on the healthcare system, but I've done more reporting on higher education, and it's just obvious, incontrovertibly true, that if the government is going to loan you the money to pay for your education, well, then the person charging the price for tuition, they can just raise the price because you're not paying it now, the government's paying it, and then years down the road, you're going to end up having to pay some of that, maybe all of it, maybe not any of it, if you get it forgiven or whatever, back, and it just creates these warped incentives where the person charging the price can just keep upping the price because you're never going to say, well, I can't pay for that, it's too expensive, I got to go to something else that, I mean, you could do that, but the mechanism in the market for doing that is disguised by the fact that the government comes in to say, no, we'll pay for it, and then you pay for it later. So you're still on the hook for it. But that mechanism interferes with the market's ability to set a rational price in a competitive system. And I think some of that happens in healthcare as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have done more reporting on the tuition issue than I have, but as I understand it, a lot of the inflation in American academic costs, particularly at college level, is to do with a massive influx of administrative staff and a massive expansion of administrative spending that doesn't really appear to serve the core
100%. Yes,
thing.
It's not that they're suddenly paying professors too much money at all. It's there's more administrators per student. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio on some campuses. It's tremendous growth of a bureaucracy that is not providing the core service in higher education. So it is easy to imagine that something similar has happened in the medical system, which has a similar kind of subsidy, government indirect price insurance system, where you have a tremendous bureaucratic bloat. This is a phenomenon I read about from that Slate Star Codex guy a number of years ago, cost disease, where things just get dramatically more expensive without getting better quality. And I think you can make that argument for our education system. I mean, I'm sure our education system is, in some way, at the elite level, there's more scientific knowledge that has been discovered in the last 40 years or whatever. But at the most basic level of providing rudimentary reading, math skills to K through 12, I don't know that there's much evidence we've gotten better at doing that, even as those services have become much and more expensive. In the medical system, there's been certainly life-saving technologies invented in the last 20, 30, 40 years, although we haven't really updated medicine, why am I kidding? Antibiotics.
Okay, yeah.
We don't have enough new antibiotics, and that's going to be a problem with antibiotic-resistant diseases and all that kind of thing. So it's a problem.
It is. I do think there's a bit of a difference.
But the debt is a problem too.
Right. No, it is. So first of all, I think there's a bit of a difference between education and healthcare because I see the expansion in healthcare costs being mostly driven by corporations and their profit motives. But just getting back to the Medicare Social Security thing, I think it was just yesterday was talking about what I view as Trump's propensity for just very broad slogans. Michael Tracy mentioned it in a very different context earlier. And so there's on one hand, Trump is like, I'm going to protect Social Security and Medicare because he knows it's popular to say that. And on the other hand, he's saying, I'm going to give Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy the power to massively cut government spending because in theory that's popular too. But the clash or conflict between those two impulses has to be handled in some way now that he's going to be in government in January. And what will the hard decisions lead him to where will they lead him?
I say when you had too much to drink, you gotta face the hangover the next morning. Drinking more will delay the inevitable, but you have to, at one point, have what the situation you got yourself into, and that is, I think, the metaphor I would use for reckless government spending, even for services we do appreciate.
I will not get in the way of that metaphor, Robby. You go for it.
Little hair of the dog, feels good now, bad for you later. More Rising coming up right after this. Stay with us, please.